Hello, everyone. Welcome to the H+C webinar, the Electrification of Heat. My name is Dr. Andy Smallbone. I'm an associate professor at Durham, and I'm the director of the Network Plus. This event's been organised through the EPSRC Network Plus for the decarbonisation of heating and cooling, and is part of an ongoing series which looks at the different challenges of decarbonising our heating and cooling sector and behaviours. So this month we are delighted to welcome speakers who are leading policy and research around the topic of electrification of heat, and we're grateful to both presenters providing their time today. So the first speaker that we're going to hear from is Dr. Matthew Aylott, and he is the Electrification and Heat lead with the Clean Heat Directorate within BEIS. Matt is the senior policy advisor with extensive experience in managing complex programs and policy development, and he specializes in climate change and low carbon energy system, and he has a PhD in climate change impacts in forest growth from the University of Southampton. So thank you very much, and please take it away, Matt.
Lovely stuff. So yes, as Andrew said, I'm Dr. Matthew Aylott. I'm the Electrification of Heat policy lead in UK government, and I'm just going to talk through some of the results from our Electrification of Heat demonstration project. And I'll give you just a bit of background to heat pump policy in the UK and why the Electrification of Heat demonstration project was created and why it's so important. And then I'll talk through some of the results from the project that we've published over the last 3 to 6 months. So firstly, why are we interested in electrifying heat? Hopefully people on this webinar will understand the context, but just to lay it out in black and white, heating is responsible for over a third of UK carbon emissions. So reducing our carbon emissions to net zero by 2050 means decarbonising the heating of over 30 million homes and businesses across the UK in a little over 25 years or under 10,000 days. So a really big challenge that we've got in front of us. In addition, around half of the natural gas demand in the UK is used for heating. So moving away from fossil fuels and decarbonising our home heating and businesses is also an energy security priority. Our analysis in the department suggests that heat pumps will have a particularly important role to play in all future heating scenarios, irrespective of the role of other technologies like hydrogen for domestic heating. And that's why we're introducing some ambitious policies to deliver 600,000 heat pumps a year by 2028. And as you can see on the right-hand side there, in terms of the cumulative deployment, about 1 in 10 homes by the end of the decade will have a heat pump installed. So a really significant challenge from where we are now. And in particular, decarbonising heat is arguably the hardest challenge to overcome in reaching net zero. It's consumer facing, it's costly, it's disruptive. There's multiple actors involved in the supply chain, and there is no one size fits all solution. So that was part of the background to UK heat policy, and one of the reasons why it was really important to deliver the Electrification of Heat demonstration project. The project started way back in November 2019 and set out to demonstrate the feasibility of large-scale rollout of heat pumps in the UK. And we wanted to do that by obtaining evidence of consumer motivations for choosing a heat pump, understanding their experience across a different range of different social demographic groups and consumer archetypes. We also wanted to obtain evidence of heat pump suitability across the particularly diverse range of different housing archetypes we have in the UK. And we also wanted to obtain real-world performance from heat pumps and demand profiles across a range of different housing archetypes and social demographic groups. So how did we approach the trial? Well, firstly, we recruited consumers, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, to take part in the project. We undertook home suitability surveys of a selection of properties to determine their suitability for a heat pump. Then we did detailed technical design for properties to understand the costs and the system design. And then we installed 742 heat pumps and monitored all of those heat pumps over the course of the project, which in some cases will be about 3 years worth of monitoring data. At the same time, we did surveys at each stage with consumers to understand why they chose to be involved and the particular issues or barriers that they were experiencing. We also did, and perhaps equally as important, non-participant surveys, so reasons for people exiting the program at the survey stage or the design stage. So now I'll cover off some of the results from the project. So in the first instance, we received about 9,000 expressions of interest in participating in the demonstration project. From this pool of households, we recruited just over 3,000. Then we did surveys with about 2,500 and subsequently installed 742 heat pumps. Of a mix of different makes, models, we installed high temperature and low temperature air source heat pumps, as well as hybrid heat pumps and ground source heat pumps as well. I don't expect you to pour over the detail of this right now, but this is just to highlight that we got a really good range and representative sample of different housing archetypes, people who are on different fuel sources, owner-occupiers and rented, social rented homes, as well as a complete range of different social demographic groups represented. So it was a real success in terms of delivering across a representative sample of UK housing archetypes and social demographic groups. In terms of our recruitment, a lot of people were driven by things like sustainability or interest in new technology when they were choosing to participate in the project, more so than just receiving a free heat pump installation, which was good news to us. One of the perhaps more interesting findings was that the project found that no prior knowledge of heat pumps was needed to interest consumers. So about 40% of people recruited had little or no prior knowledge of heat pumps. It's also interesting to look at the different approaches that the three delivery contractors that we employed took. We employed OVO, Warmworks and E.ON in 3 different areas of the UK. They each had very different approaches to how they recruited. In particular, OVO and Warmworks used a lot of social media and digital communications, which perhaps skewed the results that they got in terms of how they attracted perhaps greener customers or those of a slightly younger demographic, whereas E.ON used more traditional approaches and got a much larger share of people from direct mail campaigns. And that might have been one of the contributing factors to why E.ON, for example, got a lot of hybrid heat pumps installed, whereas OVO and Warmworks didn't. In terms of the people who dropped out of the project at various stages, we had 845 households opt not to progress to install before having an initial survey, and 725 households dropped out after the initial survey. That's fairly typical of big trials like this. We expect people to drop out, and perhaps is not sort of a symptomatic issue with dropouts with people choosing to install heat pumps. In particular, the main barrier that we found was disruption, and about 47% of participants who declined a heat pump installation cited disruption as their contributing factor. In terms of suitability, what we found was that heat pumps were broadly suitable across a wide range of homes, including flats and terraces, which have previously been seen as harder to treat, and even older homes were really well represented in the trial. But there were some properties that were not technically suitable for a heat pump. To some extent, that reflects the budget and the technologies that we allowed into the project, but around 19% of the total number of homes were not technically suitable for a heat pump based on the criteria that we employed in the trial. I've listed there just some of the key contributing factors to why properties weren't technically suitable. That included lack of external space for an outdoor air source heat pump unit. In some cases, the heat pump couldn't meet the heat demand for that property. In other cases, the heat pump would be too close to a neighbouring property to be within permitted development rights. In some cases, it would be too costly to install any additional measures, and in a smaller minority of properties, they lack the internal space for the larger radiators and the hot water tank. I think another really interesting finding from our perspective was that deep energy efficiency upgrades weren't necessary to install a heat pump and still get a good level of performance. Energy efficiency upgrades were only made in roughly 15% of properties where a heat pump was installed, and we installed heat pumps right across the sort of spectrum from EPC A-rated buildings through to EPC G-rated buildings, and in most cases a heat pump was recommended for all of those property archetypes based on their EPC rating. In terms of upgrades that were necessary, over 90% of properties required heat emitter upgrades, so new radiators, usually double or triple panel radiators. We also found a large number of properties required new thermal storage. Even in some cases where they had existing hot water cylinders, they might not have been suitable for a heat pump. We did experience some installation issues, and there was some issues with the quality of the installations, a lack of lagging, some issues with clearances. MCS, the micro generation certification scheme, which is designed to be the sort of quality assurance mechanism to ensure all heat pump installations are of good quality. The design standards were sometimes misunderstood. In some cases, that led to oversizing of heat pumps or uncertainty in how to account for rooms with no heat emitters. So there were some clear sort of lessons to be learnt from that aspect of the project. Planning rules were also sometimes quite unnecessarily prohibitive, particularly for flats and mid-terrace buildings because of noise constraints. And in some cases where a heat pump might have required load checks to be carried out by the distribution network operator to ensure that they had sufficient electrical capacity, that in some cases could take several months to complete. Not all properties require load checks. It's usually around and about 15 to 20% of properties would require a load check. Generally, we found, and this was a really positive for us, that there was very high levels of satisfaction with the air source heat pump and the ground source heat pumps installed. Ease of use, reliability, and heat pumps providing adequate thermal comfort were the principal contributing factors to satisfaction, emphasizing the need for passive heating solutions. Most consumers are not active users of their heating system, so really important to have those passive heating solutions, which takes some of the decision making away from the consumer. But dissatisfaction was often a result of a lack of early engagement to explain the sort of consumer journey, the time that would be needed to install the heat pump, and the level of disruption the consumer might expect. Perhaps more positive was that perceptions of heat pumps changed over time as people got more comfortable and familiar with the heat pumps. They generally, some of these issues relating to noise or the speed at which the heat pump would heat up the home, that declined quite considerably over time. Interestingly, before the installation, about 60% of participants said they'd recommend a heat pump to others. After installation, that increased to about 80%. We're hoping, as part of the next wave of surveys, which we conducted earlier last year, I should say, we will get some more evidence to support how consumer attitudes change over time. So watch this space on that. And then just to cover off finally, monitoring. So we've monitored all of the heat pumps, as I said, all 742, and got really detailed minute by minute performance data, or 2 minute by 2 minute performance data of all the heat pumps installed under the demonstration project. And we achieved that by putting heat meters and electricity meters to monitor the electricity consumed and the heat output from all of those heat pumps. At the moment, we've only got 12 months of data from roughly half of those heat pumps, but I'll share some insights that we've got so far. So previous trials have showed that on average, heat pumps have a seasonal performance factor. That's the performance of the heat pumps over the year of around 2.5 for air source heat pumps and 2.7 for ground source heat pumps. In other words, that means that for every 1 unit of electricity they use to power the heat pump, over a year, it'll deliver an average of 2.5 to 2.7 units of useful heat into the building. Or put another way, the heat pumps were 244% or 271% efficient. What we found, however, from the demonstration project was that seasonal performance factors have improved considerably from earlier trials, and for the air source heat pumps, performance had reached about 2.8, and for the ground source heat pumps, it's likely to be above 3. We haven't got a complete data set for ground source heat pumps at the moment, but there is still a massive performance gap between the lab measured and lab tested performance and the in situ real world performance. That all being said, though, it's good news in terms of an average. The average performance of a heat pump is 3.5 times more efficient than a gas boiler, which coincidentally is also the spark gap between the price of electricity and the price of gas. So running a heat pump at the moment is roughly the same price as running a gas boiler on a standard tariff, but there is a big range and there is lots of potential to increase that figure and make heat pumps more efficient, to switch on to time of use tariffs, which can reduce your heat pump running costs and make considerable savings off bills. The other good news was that heat pumps generally performed exceptionally well, especially and even during those very cold spells that we often get in the UK. We had temperatures, daily coldest temperatures get down to -6, and we still had a really good level of efficiency and performance of those heat pumps. Even during the coldest half-hour spells where temperatures got down to, I think we had -18 in one case, they were still delivering about a coefficient of 2. So really good news in terms of busting those myths that heat pumps don't work in cold temperatures. There was, however, a very clear relationship between the mean heat pump flow temperature of the heating system. So that's the temperature that gets delivered to the radiators. The lower you can make that temperature, the more efficient your heat pump will be, and in some cases quite considerably more efficient. And that could be the difference between saving or adding hundreds of pounds onto a typical energy bill. So that really emphasizes the importance of correctly sizing the heat pump. Just to touch on hybrid heat pumps, they didn't perform quite so well, and we'll be exploring the reasons why that might be the case in further research in the future. High temperature heat pumps, they performed very well compared to the low temperature heat pumps. They might be, in some cases, a sort of drop-in solution or a replacement to a gas boiler where they can deliver similar levels of heating. They might negate some of the need to replace and upgrade heat emitters or the need for insulation. But it's also worth noting that high temperature heat pumps also modulate their output. So they very rarely actually operate at those high temperatures, maybe less than 1% of the time. And then just a final summary and next steps. So most homes recruited to the project were found to be technically suitable for a heat pump. people were attracted around the positive environmental impacts of heat pumps and investing in new technology. Higher than anticipated disruption was one of the principal drivers for people dropping out. Participants were generally very satisfied with their heat pumps. There were some issues, however, with the quality of installations and oversizing of the heat pumps, and there were some delays in processing load checks, for example. But generally, we found really positive consumer feedback, and the performance of the heat pumps was around 30 to 40% higher than previous estimates of performance. And in terms of next steps, so all of our installations are complete. We'll continue monitoring those systems until at least September 2023. We've been publishing a huge raft of different outputs from the projects. We have an online tool to check if your home is suitable for a heat pump. We've published case studies, video case studies, written case studies, user guides, installer guides, participant recruitment reports, installation and performance reports, as well as the raw data behind that. We'll be publishing more performance data later in the year and our final project report. And this research has been already hugely useful in informing policy decisions and is also helping us prioritize future innovation funding through programs like our Heat Pump Ready Innovation Program. And I won't talk through any of these outputs, but just a flag, I've included in the presentation just some links to the various outputs that we've got. So please do have a look at some of these tools and resources that have been published online. They're really good tools and resources, and will hopefully be really useful to academics as well as us poor policymakers.
Thank you, Matthew.